Welcome to this Ananda Sacramento tribute to Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr. Our purpose this evening is to honor and celebrate the lives of these two extraordinary men, extraordinary for the universality of their ideals, and extraordinary for the courage they displayed in standing by those ideals. Their efforts met with stiff opposition and violence. While they were firm in their non-cooperation with injustice, they nevertheless offered love and respect in return for the violence and hate of their self-styled opponents. The concept for this program and much of the script were created by Nayaswami Hriman McGilloway of Ananda, Seattle. We hope you enjoy and are inspired by this tribute.
Gandhi and King were deeply committed to their respective faith traditions, and yet possessed a remarkable maturity in their acceptance and respect for all faiths. Each possessed the understanding that at the heart of all creations stands one truth. This magnanimity of heart extended naturally to embrace all races and all nations as their own.
Gandhi and King understood that the freedom they fought for came with a concomitant responsibility to be the change they sought in others. Thus, to demand respect from others required them to give respect to others first. They taught that freedom is not doing what you please, but doing what is right.
Gandhi and King never met each other. At the time of Gandhi's death in 1948, King's life's work to lead the civil rights movement had not yet taken shape. But these two men had a great deal in common. The baton of Gandhi's life's work was to pass to Dr. King, and from King to many others, such as Nelson Mandela in South Africa, where incidentally, in 1893, Gandhi had first begun his life's work. Dr. King studied Gandhi and his methods extensively. To that end, he traveled to India in 1959 as the guest of Prime Minister Nehru, Gandhi's successor, to learn more about the remarkable man who had secured India's independence from Britain using strategies and tactics that had never before in history been deployed on such a vast scale.
An interesting footnote to the life of Mahatma Gandhi can be found in the widely read classic Autobiography of a Yogi, the life story of Paramhansa Yogananda, whose teachings are the inspiration for Ananda. Paramhansa Yogananda visited Gandhi in 1935 on his only trip back to India since taking up residence in America in 1920. At Gandhi's ashram near Wardhar, India, Yogananda initiated Mahatma Gandhi and his close followers into the meditation technique of Kriya Yoga.
Gandhi and King were not just idealists. Each displayed an intimate knowledge of law, politics, and human nature. Both were highly educated, articulate intellectuals, and yet at the same time charismatic leaders, speakers, and writers who identified strongly with those whose sufferings they sought to alleviate. No detail of their campaigns escaped their interest.
What set these men apart from most politicians and reformers of the 20th century was their inner life of prayer and meditation, from which they derived a heroic willingness to do what they perceived to be God's will. Though both were burdened and at times paralyzed with guilt born of their own human shortcomings, they soldiered on with faith in the righteousness of the cause to which they had given the full measure of their lives.
Each had to come to terms with the likelihood that the ultimate sacrifice would be asked of them, and indeed, in due course, each died from the bullet of an assassin. The example of their lives and their message to humanity was nothing less than a call to personal transformation, inspired by faith and hallowed by divine grace.
It is this message of personal transformation that applies to us here today. For while you and I are not likely to become a Mahatma, we can each strive to guide the nation of our own mental and moral citizens. And just as surely, our example will spread to those around us. Whether a Mahatma or a mom, the secret of happiness and the secret of success in life are one and the same: harmony with truth and unconditional love.
The music we will share with you in this program has been composed by Swami Kriyananda, founder of Ananda and direct disciple of Paramhansa Yogananda.
If you're seeking freedom in a revolution, oh, if you're seeking freedom, you won't find it there. For once the guns stop blazing, you'll find it amazing how the world can drag on just as before. If you're seeking freedom in a marble mansion, oh, if you're seeking freedom, you won't find it there. For even when it's sunny, you'll be counting money, keeping up that showcase, your face lined with care. And if you're seeking freedom on a throne of power, oh, if you're seeking freedom, you won't find it there. For though men all obey you, what if they betray you? Tense you'll be and waiting for foes everywhere. But if you're seeking freedom, cast away desires. Why barter like a beggar, you've wealth everywhere. For never can you buy it, grasp and you deny it. Freedom can't be hoarded, it's free as the air. And if you're seeking freedom, seek it on the mountains. Got sunlight on your shoulders, the wind in your hair. For there's no one can hold you, boss about or mold you. Once your heart is free, you'll be king everywhere. For there's no one can hold you, boss about or mold you. Once your heart is free, you'll be king everywhere.
At the funeral ceremony of Mahatma Gandhi, Edward R. Murrow, the most distinguished American broadcaster of the time, sat on the makeshift platform, a microphone marked CBS before him, describing the procession as technicians and staff moved quietly around him, and declared, "The object of this massive tribute died as he had always lived. A private man, without wealth, without property, without official title or office. Mahatma Gandhi was not a commander of great armies nor ruler of vast lands. He could boast no scientific achievements or artistic gift. Yet men, governments, and dignitaries from all over the world have joined hands today to pay homage to this little brown man in the loincloth who led his country to freedom. Pope Pius, the Archbishop of Canterbury, President Truman, the Foreign Minister of Russia, the President of France, are among the millions here and abroad who have lamented his passing. In the words of General George C. Marshall, the American Secretary of State, Mahatma Gandhi had become the spokesman for the conscience of mankind, a man who made humility and simple truth more powerful than empires. And Albert Einstein added, generations to come will scarce believe that such a man as this ever in flesh and blood walked upon this earth.
Mohandas Gandhi was born on October 2nd, 1869, in Porbandar, India. He left India in 1888 to study law in London. In 1893, he went to do legal work in South Africa, which was then also a British colony. He remained there for 21 years, working to correct the unjust and inhumane treatment of ethnic Indians. It was during this time that he established what he called satyagraha, a non-violent method of direct social action based on spiritual principles and personal discipline. It is the basis for passive resistance, or non-violent non-cooperation.
Gandhi returned to India in 1915, and it wasn't long until he had become the leader of the Indian nationalist movement. Over the following decades, he spent a total of 7 years in prison for his political activities, often fasting to emphasize his commitment through personal self-sacrifice. In 1947, when at last independence from Britain was in sight, it became clear that to Gandhi's dismay, the country was going to be partitioned into Hindu and Muslim states, India and Pakistan. Gandhi believed that only a united India would offer hope to heal the wounds and fears aroused by years of divisive political leadership leading to independence. But a united India was not to be. Immediately, mass rioting and mass migrations between the two newly formed countries ensued.
Gandhi, now 78, vowed to fast until the bloodshed ceased. After 5 days, the opposing leaders pledged to stop the fighting, and Gandhi broke his fast. But 12 days later, he was assassinated by a Hindu fanatic. Gandhi's last words were addressed to God, Hey Ram.
Gandhi worked tirelessly, not just for political independence for India, but for social equality for women and for the untouchables of India, for better working conditions and for more just terms for tenant farmers. He began a nationwide homespun cloth spinning campaign so that Indians could once again, with dignity, make their own clothes and not have to import cloth from Britain, cloth made from cotton grown in India. He lobbied against unfair taxes, as in his now famous march to the sea to protest the tax on salt.
Where there is love, Gandhi said, there is life. Hatred leads to destruction. We must widen the circle of our love, he also stated, until the scope of our love becomes coterminous with the whole world. The forms are many, but informing spirit is one. The final goal of all life is to realize this essential oneness.
To teeming millions in India, as illustrated by scenes filmed in 1931, he was a supreme leader and revered as a saint. Mahatma Gandhi acclaimed upon his release from prison. He was jailed repeatedly by the British authorities for agitating non-violent resistance to the British rule. A London-trained lawyer who reverted to Hindu tradition, he rallied the vast masses of Hindus to the cause of Indian independence. Acclaimed in Europe, Gandhi a world figure. Here in France, crowds thronged around the little brown man in his simple garb of Oriental humility. He was an exceedingly human figure, genial, shrewd in dealing with people and politics, this spiritual leader and mystic of India. In England, for a roundtable conference on Indian independence that failed, there were popular demonstrations for the world-famous opponent of British rule in India and a Gandhi message for English children.
You are going to tell the other children that I love you all as my own children. That's all I want to say.
Gandhi's long years of labor were crowned by success. India independence won. The treaty making, with the Mahatma the dominant influence behind the scenes. Triumph and tragedy. Hindu-Muslim feud. And now Gandhi goes on a pilgrimage pleading for peace. All his life he has preached nonviolence, and now Indian independence, his own great cause, has been followed by murderous violence. Striving for peace, he goes on his 15th and final fast. His weapons always were fasting, prayer, and penance. Then his doom. In the garden here at New Delhi, shot by a Hindu fanatic demanding war with Muslims. The tragedy of Gandhi, a figure the world knew so well.
Gandhi also had a wonderful sense of humor. In a mock apology, he once said,
"I have been known as a crank, a faddist, and a madman. Evidently the reputation is deserved, for wherever I go, I draw to myself cranks, faddists, and madmen."
A reporter once asked, "What do you think of Western civilization?"
"I think it would be a good idea."
Mahatma Gandhi popularized the term ahimsa, a Sanskrit word meaning nonviolence. He wrote, "Nonviolence is the law of our species, just as violence is the law of the brute. The spirit lies dormant in the brute, and he knows no law but that of physical might. But the dignity of man requires obedience to a higher law, to the strength of the spirit."
India honors Gandhi not only as the father of its nationhood, but also as a Mahatma, or great soul. At the shrine in Delhi where he was assassinated, pilgrims gather each dawn to chant the ancient Upanishadic prayer Gandhi loved best. Lead us from untruth to truth, from darkness to light, from death to immortality.
Martin Luther King was 19 years old in 1948, the year that Gandhi was killed. Dr. King described segregation during his youth in these words: "There was a strict system of segregation when I was growing up in Atlanta. For a long, long time I could not go swimming until there was a Negro YMCA. A Negro child in Atlanta could not go to any public park. I could not go to the so-called white schools. In many of the stores downtown, I couldn't go to a lunch counter to buy a cup of coffee. I could not attend any of the theaters. There were 1 or 2 Negro theaters, but they didn't get any of the first-run pictures, or if they did, it would be 2 or 3 years later. In high school, I took the bus across town to a Negro high school. Negroes had to sit in the back of the public buses, even having to stand when there were empty seats because those seats were reserved for whites. Every time I got on the bus, I left my mind up on the front seat, saying to myself, one of these days I'm going to put my body up there where my mind is.
In 1948, the year that Martin graduated at the top of his class at Morehouse College in Atlanta, he met and married Coretta Scott. And by 1954, he was the minister of his own church in Montgomery, Alabama. It was here, a year later, that Rosa Parks, a black woman, defied local law and refused to give up her seat on a bus to a white man.
The very next day, Dr. King teamed up with Reverend Ralph Abernathy and others to organize the Montgomery bus boycott that launched the civil rights movement. For the next 13 years, Dr. King would use these and other tactics to educate, organize, lead, and inspire his people and people everywhere in the struggle against exploitation, injustice, and prejudice. His assassination on April 4, 1968, marked the end of an era, but his spirit marches on. His legacy is not limited to the civil rights movement in America. It is for all races and nations.
People who lived in these hills, brave the great warriors who confronted the fall, to defend what is holy, to defend what is true. Our Lord on mankind in his duty bestow. Glad all our children who people these hills, glad in their visions their hearts understand what became of past struggles. Now the records are still, but courage still lingers, giving strength to the land. And hunger for riches, for power, for fame, by favor they think they will grow. The battles they fight, the victories they win, are never the victories they know. Men hunger for riches, for power, and for fame, by favor they think they will grow. The battles they fight, the victories they win, are never the victories they know. Brave were the people who lived in these hills, brave the great warriors who confronted the foe, to defend what is holy, to defend what is true. Our Lord on mankind did this duty bestow. Our Lord on mankind did this duty bestow.
One Sunday afternoon in the spring of 1950, during my time at Crozer Theological Seminary, I traveled to Philadelphia to hear a sermon by Dr. Mordecai Johnson, the first African-American president of Howard University. He had just returned from a trip to India. To my great interest, He spoke of the life and teachings of Mahatma Gandhi. His message was so profound and electrifying that I left the meeting and bought a half-dozen books on Gandhi's life and works.
As I delved deeper into the philosophy of Gandhi, I came to see that the Christian doctrine of love, operating through the Gandhian method of nonviolence, is one of the most potent weapons available to an oppressed people in their struggle for freedom.
I was particularly struck by Gandhi's words, "Through our pain, we will make them see their injustice." Gandhi was inevitable. If humanity is to progress, Gandhi is inescapable. He lived, thought, and acted inspired by the vision of humanity evolving toward a world of peace and harmony. We may ignore him at our own risk.
The destiny of the United States is tied up with the destiny of India. India is a tremendous force of peace and nonviolence, at home and abroad. It is a land where the idealist and the intellectual are yet respected.
In this segment, we will read excerpts from the prelude to the book by Stephen Oates entitled Let the Trumpets Sound, The Life of Martin Luther King Jr. During these readings, we will display video footage of Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech.
Martin Luther King Jr. perceived that the civil rights movement was an extension of the Civil War, and that Negroes of his day were striving to realize the promise of Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation. King did more than any other leader in his generation to help make emancipation a political and social fact in the racially troubled South. King also mounted a personal crusade to convert President John F. Kennedy into a modern Lincoln in the theater of civil rights, only to become another Lincoln himself. In the end, King fell in Memphis, Tennessee, a victim of the same conflict over racial tensions and national destiny that had claimed Lincoln's life in another April long before.
King's achievements were nothing less than astounding for a man who was cut down at the age of only 39 and who labored against staggering odds. Not only the bastion of segregation that was the American South of his day, but the monstrously complex racial barriers of the urban North, a hateful FBI crusade against him, jealousy on the part of rival leaders and organizations, and finally, the Vietnam War and a vengeful president, Lyndon Johnson.
In 1961, protesters in Albany, Georgia, demonstrated against discrimination. They were arrested despite following the principle of nonviolence preached by Martin Luther King Jr. In Washington, on August 28, 1963, Martin Luther King Jr. made his famous plea for freedom and equality.
I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
Recollecting his time at Crozer Theological Seminary, Reverend King wrote, "I was able to strengthen my spiritual life through communing with nature. I made it a practice to go out to the edge of the campus every afternoon for at least an hour to commune with nature. In this experience, I saw God. I saw him in the birds of the air, the leaves of the tree, the movement of the rippling waves, and at night I would look up at the stars. There is God."
Dr. King stated,
Everybody can be great because anybody can serve. You only need a heart full of grace and a soul generated by love.
Dr. King's response to the constant threats on his life could be summed up in this response: I have a job to do. If I were constantly worried about death, I couldn't function. This cause is so right, so moral, that if I should lose my life, in some way it would aid the cause.
Dr. King goes on to say, one who won't die for something is not fit to live.
Freedom is never given voluntarily by the oppressor. It must be demanded by the oppressed. Freedom has always been an expensive thing. History is fit testimony to the fact that freedom is rarely gained without sacrifice and self-denial.
The green summer fade and winter draw near. My Lord, in your presence I live without fear. Through tempest, through snows, through turbulent tide, the touch of your hand is my strength and my guide. I ask for no riches that death can destroy. I crave only thee, your love and your joy.
Describing the first test of his leadership, the bus boycott in Montgomery, Alabama in 1956, Dr. King declared in his speech that night to an overflowing and tense crowd,
We are here because we are American citizens, and we are determined to apply our citizenship to the fullness of its meaning. There comes a time when people get tired of being trampled over by the iron feet of oppression. And we are not wrong in what we are doing. If we are wrong, the Constitution of the United States is wrong. If we are wrong, God Almighty is wrong. If we are wrong, Jesus of Nazareth was a utopian dreamer. But let us be Christian in all of our actions. Love is one of the pivotal points of the Christian faith, but standing beside love is always justice.
The nonviolent approach does not immediately change the heart of the oppressor. It first does something to the hearts and souls of those committed to it. It gives them new self-respect. It calls up resources of strength and courage they did not know they had. Finally, it reaches the oppressor and so stirs his conscience that reconciliation becomes a reality.
By 1967 and 1968, despite declining popularity at home and discouraging setbacks, he stood as a global champion of love and nonviolence in a world racked by war and plagued by hate. Regardless of his own shattered dreams, he insisted to the very end that he was still an optimist, that he still believed that one day all of God's children would live together in a symphony of brotherhood.
In 1966, after Dr. King announced his opposition to the war in Vietnam, he encountered further opposition from within the civil rights movement, and now also from the United States government. The last years of his life paralleled those of Mahatma Gandhi in that each man experienced deep discouragement and disappointment as a tide of rising violence threatened not only their work, but in the end, their lives. But what Dr. King said of Gandhi has prophetically applied to him as well. The man who shot Gandhi only shot him into the hearts of humanity.
King liked to ruminate on the fertile cross-pollination of ideas that had engendered the philosophy of nonviolence to which he had committed his life. Thoreau had been inspired by sacred Hindu writings and teachings, Gandhi in turn by Thoreau, and King and his colleagues by both of them.
In an excerpt from a speech entitled Beyond Vietnam, April 4th, 1967, 1 year to the day before his assassination, Dr. King stated,
"This call for worldwide fellowship that lifts neighborly concern beyond one's tribe, race, class, and nation is in reality a call for an all-embracing and unconditional love for all mankind. This oft-misunderstood, this oft-misinterpreted concept has now become an absolute necessity for the survival of man."
I've been in many countries and mixed with many men. I've shared the days of sunshine, gone with them in the rain. The fires at evening said we were brothers. The fires at evening said we were brothers.
A soldier I saw weeping beside a dying friend.
My officers had preached I must hate him till the end. But seeing his grief I knew we were brothers. But seeing his grief I knew we were brothers.
A man sat on a doorstep to see the children play. The gentle way he smiled there would charm your fears away. A stranger he, but love made us brothers. A stranger he, but love made us brothers.
One day I climbed a mountain with friends of other lands.
The words we used were different, but joy one understands.
Our gladness in God's world made us brothers. Our gladness in God's world made us brothers. Though words and customs vary like waves upon the sea, one life beneath the surface binds everyone to me. Who knows himself knows all men as brothers. Who knows himself knows all men as brothers. Then brothers, why endeavor to set ourselves apart? The fences we've been building squeeze tight upon our hearts. Come sing the truth that all men are brothers. Come sing the truth that all men are brothers.
We now come to a recorded excerpt of the concluding words of Dr. King's last public speech, given April 3rd, 1968, the night before his assassination. The circumstances surrounding his visit to Memphis that day were not encouraging, either for his personal safety or for his life's work. Dr. King spent some of that afternoon alone in prayer. By all accounts, it appears he had a profound spiritual experience. Like the prophets of old, The words you will hear are scriptural in their power and, like rays of light from the sun, extend outward in glory to bless all who receive their warmth. Those who understand the heights of his vision of God and truth, the image of the mountaintop, may have its roots in the goal of racial equality, but it extends upward to infinity and oneness with God and all life. The power of his words will endure and inspire generations to come.
We've got some difficult days ahead, but it really doesn't matter with me now because I've been to the mountaintop. I don't mind. Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place, but I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And he's allowed me to go up to the mountain. And I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord.
Peace gave us the mountains, peace gave us the sky. Nightly when starlight enfolds us, peace is its lullaby. Peace gave us the morning, peace gave us the sun, bird songs that call us to welcome day and fresh labors begun. Amen. Peace gave us the seasons, peace gave us the rain, cool clouds that gather to bless us, mist hands that soothe away pain. Amen.